Firstly, thank you very much to IFPRI and to Johannes for the opportunity that you gave us to talk about some of our work. The Aga Khan Development Network works in rural development in 12 countries, has been working in these areas for over 30 years, reaching nearly 6 million people. And in that time, we feel that we've learned a thing or two about scaling up. When we started our programs, and I've been associated with the Aga Khan Network for nearly 25 years, it was very much single sector work, health, education, rural development, and very siloed. And in those years, in the first decade of the foundation's work, we will be very much involved in scaling up in a vertical sense. And I think the papers refer to that, and many other organizations are doing a similar sort of thing, and Johannes alluded to that, which is all about policy dialogue. You do 15 schools and you feel very good about it, then you realize a district has 100 schools in Pakistan, and then a province has maybe 10,000 schools, and you realize you're only doing work your work is just a drop in the bucket. So then that's when we started thinking about scaling up and looking at policy issues. But we hit a snag, especially in fragile states, because governments did not have the capacity to absorb policy change and to drive policy change. And that struggle about how do you get government to absorb new changes and to actually make those reforms still remains a huge challenge, particularly when you couple it with the lack of resources. And I'm setting these questions for you, perhaps we can talk about afterwards, but I'll come up with sort of what we did differently as a result. There are examples of those policy changes: early childhood education in Kenya, or health in Pakistan, or forestry commission work in India. Very small changes that we wanted to make in these three sectors, time and again hit barriers. But we felt that we could make some success in sort of vertical scaling up. The second thing that we found was that no matter what you felt about scaling up, governments mattered, and governments had to be able to be resourced in order to undertake larger programs. But in that arena, government resources were always going to be limited, again, particularly in fragile states. So you are left with this sort of conundrum of wanting to work with government in all the sorts of things that Johannes talks about, but both the lack of absorptive capacity or capacity, generally human capacity, and the lack of resources. So what do you do? And the Aga Khan Development Network's response, particularly again in fragile states, has been to do what we are calling in our paper horizontal scaling up. What that means is that we have broken down, or are trying to break down, the silos between health, education, rural development, and economic development. What we are saying is that really in these countries that we operate in, it's about multi-input area development. Not old-style integrated rural development, new-style multi-input area development. How do you sequence different interventions so that you inherently make the social development interventions much more sustainable? What do you do? And in our opinion, you need to identify economic drivers that generates that real income for people to be themselves better able to sustain social needs that they have. And therefore to sort of recognize government is important, but recognize that it's got limitations, and that people need not only to be empowered, but they really have to have that income that underpins that. Secondly, we need to understand, we have grasped the nettle and said, in those economic drivers that we need to establish in those regions, private sector is vital. And so we are looking at 8 multi-input area development regions in Africa and Asia, where we're asking the whole question about how do you identify, firstly, economic drivers in these regions that will underpin the social development. And I buy completely the notion of value chains, and I'm glad that Johannes was asked to strengthen that or think more about that, because it is about creating that economic value in these regions that underpins the work of the social development. So increasingly that's our learning, that it is about scaling up, but it's think much more about horizontal scaling up, combined with sort of empowering people and that whole bottom-up approach, which we have, we feel we have pioneered, but much more we have always held as a strong principle of our work. Second strong principle of our work, and it comes out of our learning, but it's also a conviction of His Highness the Aga Khan, who truly has been that inspirational leadership over these 30 years or more to guide this process. And the second principle is you have to stick at it. There are no short-term solutions to rural development. If any of us had any delusions about that, I'm sure they're all lost, and I think I'm talking to the converted here. But it's the manner, and that's my third point, it's the manner in which you stick at it, which is important. And, you know, I say this much more emphatically because Johannes asked me to talk a little bit about the management style of the work that we do. For us, development, and rural development in particular, is a process. And scaling up is going to be, if we don't already believe it, a process. And that process needs people of conviction to stay with it for the long term. And I think this is probably the major failing of international organizations, including Aga Khan, that we cannot find competent people, nationals as well as expatriates, to really stay the time that is needed to make that transformation in rural areas. And I'm a victim, or I'm a criminal as far as I'm concerned in that. I have not spent more than 4 years in any country that I have worked in. And so I can't expect others to do it. But I do think that that is going to be one of the fundamental challenges that we have, because building those stakeholder networks, building from bottom up, working with government, is all massively a headache. And we simply don't have people who are willing to give the time to do that. And I think that one of our lessons, and one of the things that His Highness the Aga Khan continually asks for, is long-term loyalty and contribution to the work of development. I'll end with just a very small joke. He was once recruiting a rural development director for Pakistan, and there was an interview, and this gentleman, who will remain unnamed until the coffee time, who related this story to me, said, His Highness asked me a very simple question, so how long do you think rural development will take in Pakistan? And this gentleman replied, a lifetime, thinking he was going to make a nice joke with His Highness. And His Highness was very serious. He looked back at him and said, exactly. That's how long it's going to take. And so I'll leave you with those few thoughts. I want to thank my colleagues who wrote the paper. I think it's a fine paper. And again, thank you very much for allowing us to tell a little bit about our story in this forum. Thank you.